You could not pay me $1 billion to travel to the bottom of the ocean in this can of butter biscuits. The Titan wasn't a sub. It was a carbon fiber soda can with a PlayStation controller and 5 human souls sealed inside. And the first thing Stockton Rush, the man sitting at the head of this thing, said was, if you hear an alarm, well, just don't worry about it. 5 people boarded this vessel. One of them was a billionaire. One of them was his 19-year-old son. One of them had been to the Titanic more than anyone else alive. 90 minutes into their descent, all communication stopped. 16 minutes after that, a sound detected over 900 miles away echoed through the Atlantic. A sound that was consistent with a catastrophic implosion. Welcome to That's My Opinion, where we break down the biggest stories, uncover hidden truths, and explore why they matter. I'm Bacon Bears, and today we're talking about the OceanGate Titan submersible, a mission built on ego, silenced warnings, and a tragedy that everyone literally saw coming. As always, this video is for conversational purposes only. Do your own research and form your own opinions, because this one's mine. And let's get into it. Stockton Rush is a name that is now synonymous with disaster. But before a catastrophic end, he was being called a visionary. He came from extreme privilege, generational wealth, and had every resource available to him. And he used that to chase one thing, and seemingly one thing only: fame. He built a kit airplane when he was younger, had access to elite education, but by all accounts, he was not an exceptional student. What he lacked in academic brilliance, he made up for in confidence or arrogance, depending on who you ask. He idolized the likes of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, literally telling people that they were the, quote, big swinging dicks of innovation, and he wanted to be one of them. Stockton founded OceanGate with a bold vision to take civilians to the wreckage of the Titanic. But instead of working with military-grade engineers or experienced designers, he actively bypassed standard safety protocols. Now, OceanGate created 3 vessels over the years. There was Cyclops 1, which was an early test model, limited in depth and basic design. The Antiquity sub, used for smaller expeditions, but not built for Titanic-level depths. And then came Titan, the experimental carbon fiber sub that would change everything if he could get it to work. Titan could carry 5 people, was controlled by a Logitech gaming controller, and had no traditional safety certifications. Why? Because Stockton refused to get it classed. Now, let me explain. When a vessel is classed, it means it has been inspected and certified as safe by a recognized third party. That certification allows you to take passengers, especially if they're paying. But Stockton didn't want oversight. He didn't want rules. Instead, he came up with a workaround. He called his customers, quote, mission specialists. And that allowed him to collect money without triggering the legal standards required for commercial submersibles. Mission specialists. Sounds like you're part of the team, right? Like you're running sonar or doing research or something official. But in reality, these people were tourists, wealthy people who paid up to $250,000 to sit in a sub. There was no real training, no safety infrastructure, no actual responsibility. But by giving them a job title, OceanGate avoided the legal requirements tied to paying clients. And by the way, OceanGate's other 2 subs were classed. He knew how to do it. He just chose not to with Titan. In interviews, Stockton claimed Titan was one of the safest subs in the world, but internally his staff was seeing problem after problem. There were structural issues, red flags, incomplete systems, but to Stockton, none of this would matter. He wanted headlines, he wanted firsts, and most importantly, he didn't want anybody telling him no. The sub's carbon fiber hull was designed in collaboration with the University of Washington's Applied Physics Lab back in 2013. This was the first time carbon fiber had ever been used for a deep-sea manned sub, and for good reason. Carbon fiber is strong and lightweight, but it's very brittle under certain conditions. It's not like steel. When a steel hull starts to fall, it bends and gives warning. When carbon fiber fails, it snaps. Now, let's talk about what most deep sea submersibles are actually made of real quick. They are built with titanium, thick steel, or specially engineered composite metals. Why? Because they can bend under pressure without breaking. They deform before they fail, giving pilots a chance to surface if something goes wrong. But carbon fiber, it is not forgiving. It does not bend. It shatters. And once it starts to crack, it doesn't give you time because you never know which fiber is going to be your last. And Stockton Rush knew this. Everyone in the deep sea engineering world knew this. But instead of using tried and true materials, he chose carbon fiber because it was cheaper, lighter, and more innovative. And if he could get this to work, I mean, honestly, if he could get it to work, then there would be a bunch of little tiny subs everywhere, but he couldn't get it to work. Nobody else has been able to make it work, and there's a reason why. During pressure tests, engineers could actually hear the fibers popping as they dove. They had acoustic monitors inside the hull, and the idea was that the sensors inside the sub would listen for small cracking or popping sounds. Acoustic signals that could warn if the structure was starting to fail. The thinking was, if we hear the material beginning to break down, we can abort the dive and surface in time. But the problem is you can't predict when a catastrophic failure will happen, even if you're listening for it. Multiple engineers said that the system couldn't accurately identify what sounds meant danger versus what sounds meant normal material stress. The pops were constant. Every dive had them. And by the time you hear a bad one, it might already be too late. But Stockton called that an unparalleled safety measure. But according to multiple people who worked on Titan, the whole system was just made up to comfort people who asked too many questions. And I'm sorry, if you're taking me to the bottom of the ocean, I'm asking all the questions. And I don't want a safety system that's built on pretend. Now, I have to tell you that I'm not sure. No, I'm sure. I'm sure that I would never go on a guaranteed safe trip to the bottom of the ocean. Love deep sea stuff. I love deep sea fish. I love the idea of being able to find a giant squid alive. But you couldn't put me in a sub, not in the safest sub. No thanks. I can watch it from my TV, but let me know if you would go to a submarine to the bottom of the ocean in the comments down below. I need to know. Let's play a game of Would You Rather. Would you rather deep sea ocean or far out in space? I would go to space. I love the ocean more than I love space, but I would gladly go to space. But Stockton didn't want that. He fostered an environment where if you questioned him, you were gone. And that's where we start to see the cracks, literally and figuratively, that would lead to the loss of 5 lives. Because while Stockton Rush was out here calling Titan one of the safest subs ever built, the people working with him were sounding the alarm over and over and over again. First, you have David Lochridge, OceanGate's director of marine operations. This man was the chief pilot, the person responsible for knowing exactly how this thing was built, tested, and operated. He was hired specifically to make sure that everything would go the way that it was supposed to. And even he flat out said, we shouldn't be diving this. When Lochridge refused to dive, Stockton told him, you know what? I want you to carry out the final inspection of Titan then. So Lochridge did. He spent days going over the sub in detail. When he was done, he handed in a report again, stating there were unresolved issues that posed serious risks to human life. The next morning, there was a meeting, and Stockton asked him, how long have you had these concerns? And Lochridge was like, since the beginning. And then Stockton asked him, what is your goal with this report? And Lochridge was like, to protect the safety of everyone involved, including you. And Stockton, of course, as any reasonable human being would be, he was pissed. And imagine being pissed that a man you hired to do a job did his job. This was a man being confronted by experts, by professionals, and he couldn't handle it. He said, I know what I'm talking about. Then why hire people who literally know more than you? Why surround yourself with engineers if you're just going to ignore what they say? And when Lochridge told him that it wasn't safe, Stockton didn't improve the sub. He just fired him. Oh, and then he sued him. OceanGate filed a civil lawsuit against Lochridge and tried to take everything he had. They accused him of violating a non-disclosure agreement, wrongfully sharing confidential technical information, spreading false and damaging statements about the company, trying to damage their business and reputation. But Lochridge was like, hell no, and fought back. He took it to federal court. He filed a federal counterclaim under whistleblower protection laws, which made everything public. And what he alleged was damning. He said OceanGate was cutting corners, bypassing regulation, and operating in a manner that was reckless and dangerous. According to his filing, the Titan had major safety flaws, including a viewing port that was only certified to 1,300 meters, even though they were planning dives to nearly 4,000 meters. He also claimed the company refused to pay for proper hull testing, fired him for raising safety concerns, and that the vessel itself was never properly classed or inspected. And that's how any of this came to light. He also filed a formal safety complaint with OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which oversees worker protection and safety. But OSHA didn't follow through. They said they had other cases, limited resources, and eventually dropped it. OceanGate just kept moving forward. Stockton told another employee, Tony Nissen, that it would be nothing to spend $50,000 and ruin someone's life when referring to Lochridge, which is interesting because if I got $50,000, I could change my life. I guess we just manage money differently. I don't know. And Nissen in the documentary said Stockton was a psychopath who ran OceanGate in a way that made people afraid to speak up. Tony Nissen also raised concerns. He noticed a crack in the Titan's carbon fiber hull, a literal physical crack. He documented it. He wrote it up in a report, brought it to Stockton. And what did Stockton do? He fired him as well. I see a trend happening. And then there's Bonnie Carl, who Stockton once told could be the company's lead pilot, just so he could say that he had a woman pilot and because he was actively firing all of his experienced pilots. And she said, quote, "I'm literally an accountant." And that was the moment that she realized she could no longer be a part of this, which, thank God. OceanGate would then downsize the engineering team, promote interns to pilots, refused to get the vessel classed, and all the people who tried to stop it were gone. OceanGate was good at creating the illusion of success. They had made some successful test dives, or at least that's what they called them. They even made it to the Titanic once, but just because you survive a dive does not mean it was safe. It just means that nothing went horrifically wrong at the time. And every time they went down, there were pops, cracks, and warning signs all over the place. On an early test in the Bahamas, one of their interns said that it was her first work trip and the first deep sea test for Titan. They were going down nearly 4,200 meters. And what did they hear? Popping. Loud popping. Over and over. Honestly, it sounded like somebody was hitting the hull with a hammer. The carbon fiber was creaking, or what Stockton would call is seasoning or settling, but in all reality, it was weakening. The acoustic monitors were picking it up, and Tony Nissen looked at the data and was like, this is not what you want to see. Then there was dive 80, where they were still close to the surface when a bang rang out through the sub. And Stockton said, almost every sub makes a significant sound when diving. Like, what's the big deal? Except they weren't diving. They were at the surface. So what was breaking? But they would keep diving anyways. Also, they would store Titan outside in freezing conditions, left out in the open like a $300 tent from Costco. Just millions of dollars in experimental hardware exposed to the elements. People take better care of their used cars than he did of this vessel. And then we meet Jake Koehler, aka Scuba Jake, a YouTuber who was invited on what would become Titan's final dive. And when he arrived, the weather conditions were terrible and dangerous, but OceanGate was still trying to make it happen. Jake even climbed into the sub and they were getting ready to dive when Jake said his feet were absolutely freezing and the condensation was dripping inside the vessel. And at the very last minute, the dive was canceled. And by the good grace of God, Jake didn't go. But then we get to June 18th of 2023. Titan was launched from the Polar Prince, a Canadian ship which was operating in international waters. The Titan, by the way, wasn't flagged under any country, not the US, not any nation. It was operating in like a legal gray area. And that's how OceanGate kept avoiding oversight. About an hour and a half into the dive, communications with Titan stopped, and 16 minutes later, a loud acoustic signature, a boom, was detected by a remote U.S. Navy sensor 900 miles away. The entire sub was gone. Instant implosion. Zero chance of survival. The Titan submersible imploded under the crushing pressure of the ocean at around 3,800 meters deep near the Titanic wreck site. At that depth, the pressure is roughly 5,600 pounds per square inch. That's like having the weight of a fully loaded 18-wheeler truck just pressing down on every square inch of the subsurface. And that's more than enough to collapse a human body, a steel pipe, or a carbon fiber hull in milliseconds. Experts estimate the entire sub crumpled inward in less than 50 milliseconds. That's faster than the brain can process pain. The force was so sudden that there would have been no suffering. Everyone inside was likely killed instantly as the hull failed. However, with all the bangs and the pops and them getting louder the deeper that they went, these passengers had to know what was coming. And my question is, with all the bangs and the pops, was Stockton going to the Titanic no matter what the cost? Did he ever have an intention on turning around? However, this is exactly what David Lochridge, Tony Nissen, and others warned about. Carbon fiber does not deform. It doesn't bend or creak or give you time to surface. It just shatters. One crack, one fiber failure, and the whole structure collapses like a crushed soda can. And it wasn't a matter of if, it was always a matter of when. And when the implosion happened, the only thing that surfaced was wreckage. It was found in pieces. No bodies, just fragments of carbon, fiber, and metal. But for days, families were kept in the dark. Hopes were raised with stories of underwater noises and rescue attempts, but internally agencies already suspected what had happened. And when the wreckage was found 4 days later, those suspicions were confirmed. At the center of all of this is Stockton Rush, the man who dreamed of making history, and boy did he. According to the documentary, Stockton was seen by many as arrogant, overconfident, and dangerously stubborn. People who worked with him described him as someone who couldn't take criticism, who had a massive temper, and who would blame others when things went wrong. He surrounded himself with people who either didn't question him or simply couldn't afford to. And let's be clear, this wasn't someone clawing his way up from nothing. Stockton came from immense generational wealth. His wife, Wendy Rush, came from money too. In fact, she was a descendant from 2 Titanic victims. Stockton himself had 2 relatives who signed the Declaration of Independence. These were the kind of people who grew up believing that the rules didn't apply to them. And that's exactly how he ran OceanGate. And yet people trusted him. They respected him. They called him a visionary, even when the red flags were everywhere. Stockton still had people believing the mission. And why? Because he was selling something bigger than the dive. He was selling exclusivity, adventure, and the chance to do something no one else had. They had absolute trust in a man who built a sub from experimental materials and said things like, quote, "I don't want to be told what I can't do. I want to be remembered for breaking the rules." After the Titan imploded, the world was watching. For days, search crews scanned the North Atlantic. Family members held on to hope. OceanGate stayed almost entirely silent. And then they found the wreckage. And it was over. 5 lives just lost. Stockton Rush, the CEO and pilot, Hamish Harding, British billionaire and adventurer, Shahzada Dawood, and his teenage son, Suleiman Dawood, both from one of Pakistan's wealthiest families, and Paul-Henri Nargolet, a Titanic expert who had visited the wreck more than 30 times. To this day, the U.S. Coast Guard has not released its final report, and there have been no criminal charges, no sweeping regulatory changes, and no public reckoning for the decisions that led to this tragedy. OceanGate went offline. Their social media wiped, their executives quiet. And the families, especially those of passengers like P.H. Nargolet, said that they were never even contacted by OceanGate after the implosion. And that raises the question, how was this ever allowed to happen? A man built a submersible out of carbon fiber, skipped safety certification, mocked regulations, used legal loopholes to take paying customers, ignored expert warnings, and was still just able to launch. And now 5 people are dead. Who is to be held responsible? Can anyone be held responsible? Because let me tell you, that waiver alone that they had to sign was insane. Before boarding the Titan, every mission specialist had to sign a multi-page waiver. And right out of the gate, I'm literally talking in the first paragraph, it says, quote, "This experimental vessel has not been approved or certified by any regulatory body and could result in physical injury, emotional trauma, or death." And just in case you missed it the first time, the word death appears multiple times throughout the document. OceanGate was telling you, if you die in this thing, you were warned, and we are not responsible. The waiver stripped participants of nearly all legal recourse. You couldn't sue for negligence, you couldn't claim damages, and you were essentially acknowledging that you knew this might kill you. It was shockingly blunt. And yet people still signed it. Maybe they thought it was a formality. Maybe they believed in the hype, or maybe they just didn't read it. In early 2024, the family of Paul-Henri Nargolet, the Titanic expert known as Mr. Titanic, filed a $50 million wrongful death lawsuit. They're suing OceanGate, Stockton Rush's estate, engineer Tony Nissen, and other companies involved in building the Titan. According to the suit, OceanGate knowingly concealed safety failures. One of the key issues, the sub's viewing port, which was brought up by David Lochridge, which was only rated to withstand pressure down to 1,300 meters. But the Titanic lies at nearly 4,000 meters. The Nargolet family claims that if PH had known the true condition of the vessel, he would have never boarded it. They also allege that in the final moments, the crew may have realized something was wrong, attempted to abort the dive, but were unable to surface due to system failure. The lawsuit says that the passengers suffered terror and mental anguish right before the sub imploded, something OceanGate has never publicly addressed. So far, no settlement has been reached, and Stockton Rush's estate is trying to get parts of the case dismissed. But as of right now, the lawsuit is very much alive. Now, something I want to talk about that I find very important is the impact that this had on regular people and social media. This was everywhere, including memes and people blasting billionaires, because as OceanGate was happening, so was the fact that over 500 migrants drowned in the Mediterranean Sea after a fishing boat carrying refugees capsized off the coast of Greece on June 14th of 2023, which the documentary didn't even touch on, but I guess they're still just not important. The boat, known as the Adriana, was overloaded with up to 750 people, mostly from Pakistan, Syria, and Egypt, trying to reach Europe. Despite multiple distress calls and sightings by the Greek Coast Guard, no timely rescue was launched. Only 104 survivors were pulled from the water. Over 600 people, including children, are presumed dead, making it one of the deadliest migrant disasters in recent history. And what made this more tragic for many was the disparity in global attention. 5 wealthy men go missing in a private sub and receive round-the-clock international coverage, military search missions, and global sympathy. A man who illegally made a sub, ignored everything that he was supposed to do, and 5 men who signed something to get on that sub, we are now just launching a worldwide campaign for them. And meanwhile, hundreds of poor, desperate refugees trying to escape whatever tragic home they're coming from drown. And the world barely flinched. Many people called it out as a stark example of class disparity, media bias, and how some lives are valued more than others in the public eye. But what really lit a fire online wasn't just the implosion, it was the reaction to it. Because the Titan disaster didn't unite the internet in grief. It split it right down the middle. Some people felt deep sympathy. 5 people trapped in a steel tube facing death at the bottom of the ocean, which is horrifying, my literal nightmare. And that's human. That's a tragedy. But for others, it was a punchline. The memes rolled in with hours of jokes about the PS5 controller, the Waiver, the billionaires playing submarine games. And the deeper it got, the more it turned into this digital war. Why are we crying for 5 rich guys who signed their lives away? Why is this getting more coverage than the hundreds of refugees who drowned the same week? And honestly, it's a fair question. The Adriana migrant ship sank just days before the Titan vanished. Over 600 people died, including children. But there were no Navy search teams, no breaking news tickers, and the contrast was brutal, and everyone noticed. What the Titan story exposed was a deep frustration with wealth inequality, media priorities, and the perception that if you're rich, your life is a headline. And if you're poor, well, sucks to suck. And whether people were mourning, mocking, or angry, everyone was talking about it. So where does that leave us? We watched this unfold in real time, from headlines to search missions to conspiracies and memes. But underneath it all was a very real story of ignored warnings, unchecked ego, and avoidable tragedy. We may never get a full report from the Coast Guard. Criminal charges may never come. But thanks to whistleblowers like David Lochridge and lawsuits like the one filed by P.H. Nargolet's family, the truth is out. People knew this was dangerous. Let this be a reminder that when people warn you, listen. So now that we've laid it all out, the warnings, the arrogance, the lawsuits, the silence, we want to hear from you. Who do you think should be held responsible? Was Stockton Rush a visionary who took one risk too many, or a reckless ego who gambled with people's lives? And why did the world grieve 5 men in a sub but barely blink at the hundreds who drowned in the Adriana just days before? Let me know in the comments down below. And if this video made you think, share it, subscribe if you want more deep dives like this. We break down the biggest stories, uncover hidden truths, and explore why they matter. Watch some of our other videos lying right around here. I'm Bacon Bears, and that's my opinion. See you next time.